for more on what's happening in India and the central bank there. We're joined by Dr. Anil Gupta. He's the professor of strategy, globalization, and entrepreneurism at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. Good to see you again.
See you,
Sir, let me ask you this. Shweta tried to explain kind of what was happening, but maybe you can help us a little bit further. Walk us through the three individual problems that India has. First, there's the growth. Why has growth slowed to begin with?
Yeah, I think growth has slowed because essentially supply-side constraints. The government went to sleep over the last 5 years, and the infrastructure, spending that was expected to happen didn't happen, which means a weak manufacturing sector. Which means obviously India's exports are growing, but imports have grown a whole lot faster than imports.
So they didn't get the orders they were expecting on the manufacturing side.
They didn't get the orders. Right. They didn't get the investment on the manufacturing side.
Okay, and then we have this other big problem in India called the foreign exchange issue. The last couple of months have been horrible for India. The rupee's gotten absolutely slammed.
Yeah. And
explain,
of course, I mean,
why is that?
Yeah.
Why did that happen?
I mean, essentially what has happened is that every country that was running a trade deficit, that was running a current account deficit.
Which is a lot of countries.
Which is a lot of countries. I mean, that's India, that's Indonesia, so that's Brazil. I mean, there's just a lot of countries. So they were dependent, essentially what was happening is that the current account deficit was being buttressed by the flow of money. Call it easy money, call it hot money, from the US
to
emerging markets.
Okay, so the third problem is inflation. Now, something I don't understand is if the orders are bad and they've got this deficit situation, doesn't sound like things are going all that well,
right?
Why would there be such a high inflation rate? Don't we usually get big inflation when there's not enough to go around?
Right. Typically, yes. But in the case of India, the inflation problem is really much greater in consumer price rather than wholesale prices. So that's really driven by food and fuel. Now, India imports 80% of its fuel needs. And of course, fuel goes into automotive, it goes into cooking, it goes into all kinds of things. And so as oil prices go up, India's import bill goes up.
We're going to blame oil for this, right? We're going to blame oil.
That's number one. And then in food, specific things like, say, onions, for example, and so on, which are, highly purchased, highly consumed components in food. So therefore, certain specific things in food become scarce, become expensive. And that shoots up the consumer price index.
Fair enough. So you got the inflation problem, you got the foreign exchange problem, you got the growth problem. Now, what does the central bank have to do with any of that stuff to begin with? Because people were expecting them to potentially cut rates, which we see around the world.
Correct.
Central bank, and whether it's Europe or the US, we cut rates because we want to spur growth.
Correct.
So in this case, it was a difficult choice for them, actually.
It was a difficult choice. Essentially, what the central bank governor has said, that what he wants to do is really kind of not take palliative measures, not put band-aids, but really create what he calls a bulletproof balance sheet. And he wants to address, sort of the medium to long-term issues rather than short-term problems. And of course, in the short term, one could say that he, along with the central bank governors and a lot of other emerging markets, they've got a bit of respite, because, the US Fed has decided to essentially delay the tapering. And so when that happens, you get a little bit of a breathing room. And if you get a little bit of breathing room, rather than quote unquote waste it on short-term measures, that's the time when you begin to in fact, focus on the longer term.
Mr. Rajan, the new central bank governor there, I mean, he's new in this position. Do you think that perhaps this big surprise decision has anything to do with the fact that maybe he's trying to set a different pace and making a statement as well?
He is new in this position, but he is one hell of an experienced guy. He was chief economist of the IMF, and of course, he got the first Fisher-Black Prize for the youngest and the best financial economist under the age of 40. And he has been economic advisor informally first for some time.
Fair enough. I'm not questioning his credibility, but I'm saying if I were to ask him, you raised rates at a time when the country needs you to actually lower rates when you think about growth. Won't raising rates only hurt growth more?
I think what he's trying to do is balance a number of things. Clearly, he has talked about growth. That's important to him. But at the same time, he's talked about managing inflation, keeping inflation low, because ultimately inflation hurts the consumers the most.
Real quick.
And third, of course, is to stabilize the rupee.
I want to ask you about gold very quickly.
Right.
There's been this almost funny joke in many ways that there's a lot of gold in India. I mean a lot of gold, and the government's trying to buy some of it back. Well, what's happening with all this?
It's in fact, a few $1 trillion worth of gold in India. That's basically in houses, people owning gold. And
the government's going to buy it back.
No. But I think, you see, what happens is that it's true in urban, but even rural area, if you, like 70% of rural India is not connected to the banking sector in any way. So in fact, what do they do with their savings?
They do the gold bit.
Exactly.
It is an amazing story. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us. Professor of Strategy, Globalization, Entrepreneurship, University of Meryton. Have a great weekend. Thank you. We will see you again. We're going to go to India together, but first,